I would now like to invite the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Honourable Greg Piper, MP, to acknowledge country and officially open the program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Daniela, and it's wonderful to be here at another Parliament Unpacked, and I have been to these before, and they're wonderful events from my observation, so wonderful to be here. Can I just welcome everybody here to the Jubilee Room in the New South Wales Parliament. This is a beautiful space. We enjoy being able to use it, and really pleased that you can be here. And for those people this is their first time here, I hope you can appreciate the sense of history that's here in the Jubilee Room. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which Parliament sits, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, as well as the custodians of various lands on which our online viewers are joining from. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people who are here with us today. I make the acknowledgement recognising our Parliament's complex and varied history with Aboriginal people in this state. Some of the decisions that have been made in this place since 1856 have had significantly negative ramifications for Aboriginal communities, while others have signalled a more positive change. But by acknowledging country in Parliament, we are expressing our commitment to continue to break down barriers and build trust moving forward. As a side note, I just would like to mention that those decisions that have affected so many people, particularly our First Nations people over the years, would have been largely made by people who looked like myself. They were older, white Australian men, many of them immigrant people from the mother country. We have a much more inclusive community now and a much more inclusive Parliament. And to be able to have women in here, people of other origins, ethnicities and cultures, makes this place a much stronger Parliament. So I'm very pleased to be here in this role. Daniela did introduce me, but yes, I am Greg Piper. I am the Speaker of the New South Wales Legislative Assembly, and I'm one of the two presiding officers of this Parliament who, along with my colleague Ben Franklin, who is the President of the Legislative Council, are the appointed presiding officers and have the responsibility under the Constitution for the overall management of the Parliament. On behalf of Ben and myself, the clerks and staff, and I wish to also acknowledge Mr Mark Webb, the CEO of our Department of Parliamentary Services, who has joined us. If I can include Mark there, I wish to welcome you all to our Parliament this evening. We are all here tonight for the second in this year's series of public talks, Parliament Unpacked, put together by Parliament's Communications, Engagement and Education team. Tonight's topic is about the organisations that play a role, it's put down here, as watchdogs of our democracy, but I just prefer oversight, okay? So our panel, who I'll introduce in a moment, represent a range of trusted public institutions, the Audit Office of New South Wales, the New South Wales Ombudsman, and I hope we can put in that category of trusted institutions, the New South Wales Parliament. These organisations are key pillars of a strong democracy, helping to ensure scrutiny, transparency and accountability in our system of government. There are, of course, many more institutions that play this role, such as the Commonwealth Ombudsman, other Ombudsman officers, New South Wales Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, a number of others, including, I can't go past mentioning the ICAC, for example, and of course, media. But we are very fortunate tonight to have a terrific panel of experts in the field that is now my pleasure to introduce. And it's just been my great pleasure to meet the new Auditor General here in New South Wales. I had been the previous chair of the New South Wales Public Accounts Committee, had much to do with the former and previous Auditors General. However, this is the first time I've had the opportunity, the pleasure, to meet with Bola Oyetunji, the new Auditor General of New South Wales. He has extensive executive leadership experience in strategy formulation, governance, data analytics, finance, accounting and auditing at all levels of government. He holds an honours degree in economics and a Masters of Commerce degree in finance. He is also a qualified CPA and a graduate member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. He joined the Audit Office of New South Wales in 2001 as a director in the Financial Audit Branch, and over the following 16 years he solidified and deepened his knowledge of the state's public sector, overseeing the superannuation, insurance and finance industries. In 2018, Bola was appointed Senior Executive Director at the Australian National Audit Office in Canberra, and in 2021 was made Group Executive Director. Bola became Auditor General for New South Wales in April this year. So welcome, Bola. We have, we have also joining us Mr. Paul Miller, PSM, Public Service Medal, who is the New South Wales Ombudsman. He began his career as a corporate lawyer and has postgraduate degrees in law and philosophy, as well as an MBA. Paul was previously a senior public servant working as a Deputy Secretary in the Department of Premier and Cabinet and the Department of Justice. Paul was appointed Ombudsman in May 2021 for a term of 7 years. Welcome, Paul. To my parliamentary colleagues, I have sitting next to Paul, Robin Preston, who is a member for Hawkesbury in the Legislative Assembly. Well, we're all in the Legislative Assembly here, and by the way, there shouldn't be any bells ringing, I'll just say. I don't think we're expecting any divisions tonight. So, Robin was elected in 2019, and her roles in the Parliament include Deputy Leader of the Opposition in the Legislative Assembly, Shadow Minister for Mental Health and Medical Research, and Shadow Minister for Veterans. Robin's career has spanned the private, public and not-for-profit sectors in various senior management, sales and marketing roles, as well as running her own small business. She was also Australia's first female rugby league commercial television commentator. Oh, there you go. Number one.
There's a try.
Forward pass. I'd like to thank you, Robin, for making time to be able to join in this panel discussion. Now, joining us as a member of the government is Jason Lee, the member for Strathfield, who's obviously once again in the Legislative Assembly. Jason was elected in 2022 as a member of the Australian Labor Party. His roles in the Parliament include Chair, Committee on the Independent Commission Against Corruption, and Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, and Assistant Speaker, where he works closely with myself. He has a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Laws and Master of Laws, and was a, is it Hauser? A Hauser Global Fellow and Young Global Leader at the 2009 World Economic Forum, as well as being awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship. I have to say I have great respect for my parliamentary colleagues, and I appreciate that Robin and Jason can take on these roles and be here to help inform this discussion tonight. But it is a wonderful night. I'd like to thank all of our panel members, and thank you, the audience here in the Jubilee Room and those online, for joining in and participating in learning more about the role of the Parliament and these very important oversight committees. It's very important that we expand the knowledge in the public of how the public sector works and how we look after, do our best for our communities. So thank you for that, and I'm now going to hand back to Daniela. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that very warm welcome. And thank you to each of our panel members tonight for being with us and joining us tonight And again, thank you to the audience as well. I'm going to start with a series of questions for the panel, and then we'll throw it to some questions from the audience. And you would have got, if you're in the studio in here tonight, you would have got the QR code for our Slido platform for questions. And people joining us on the live broadcast would have had the link this morning in this morning's email. Please feel free to pop a question into that at any time as you think of them, and then hopefully, time permitting, we'll have time for a few questions at the end from that platform. So, my first question is to the entire panel, and I thought we might start at this end and work our way through. And it's actually a double-barreled question, so I'll probably repeat it several times as we go. When we talk about government accountability, I just want to clarify, we mean ensuring that the whole system is working as best as it can for all of us, as opposed to just specifically government ministers, although we can touch on that as well. Can you tell us about the organisation that you represent and its role in keeping government to account? And can you tell us a little bit about your position and what you do in the role? And I guess for Robin and Jason, that would mean the chair of the particular committees, also in the opposition, what's the role of the opposition, and also as a shadow minister and also as a member of a government. So maybe you might want to throw something in about that as well. So shall we start? Bola, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And thanks for coming to listen to us. I think it's a great opportunity when, as auditors, we have a discussion about accountability, we get excited. Because that's the purpose that we do. The speaker mentioned that it would rather use oversight than watchdog. In the 1896 decision by Justice Lopez in the Kingston County Mill, it called the auditor a watchdog, not a bloodhound. And sometimes, people will think we're bloodhounds, but that is not the role of the auditor, it's the watchdog. So I work with the Audit Office team as the Auditor General. And the role of the Audit Office is to hold, government accountable for the use of taxpayers' money. And we serve Parliament. So most of the work we do is on behalf of the New South Wales Parliament, and we work closely with the Public Accounts Committee. We discuss the reports, emerging issues with them, and that is, again, for my role, you will not see me talking to the press. I think I will always have my discussion with the Parliament because that's what the role entails. And what do we do when we say auditors? And I'll keep it simple. We go to organizations that have been charged with management of public resources, and we want to make sure that they use the resources well. So we look at their bank accounts, we look at how much they spend, we look at the recording of their receipts. We just want to make sure that that is appropriately recorded. We look at the resources that is being charged with them, and we want to ensure that there are no wastages of those resources and that taxpayers' money has been judiciously spent. It's a simple exercise, and that's what we do. Now, there are a lot of expertise and knowledge in what you look for, but that's what we're trained to do. Now, one of the things then we do as auditors, we then make recommendations where we have systemic issues for things to be improved, and that is where we then report to the Public Accounts Committee so that some of the issues can be further dealt with and our recommendations implemented. Now, so the role of the Auditor General then becomes the unique role as an independent member of Parliament, and why that is so important is supports the democracy of this of the system, where no one can direct me for what I do or for the program I investigate, and it gives me that independent role to be able to do it well, and with the confidence, that when issues arise, I can independently and in a balanced way report it to Parliament, and then improvements are made in the system. So that's why we serve Parliament, and that is where, and the purpose, and this is where when I started a month ago, And one of the questions I was asked was, what will be my leadership style? And I used the word servant's leader because that is where you appreciate the opportunity you've been given and how you need to serve people to be able to do it well. So that's in a nutshell. Is what we do. I've kept it simple, so that we don't talk about complex accounting standards. They can be boring sometimes. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to tell us a little bit?
Yes. So sitting on this panel, the Ombudsman institution, probably not me, but the Ombudsman institution is the youngest on this panel. Parliament has been celebrating its 200th anniversary. The Audit Office too is it this year or next year?
This year, November.
This year, 200 years. We are a youthful 50 years next year. So in terms of democratic institutions, we're quite young, not as young as ICAC, but relatively young speaking. So to explain what we do, it's probably useful to think about why we do it and what was the problem that we were seeking to solve. Why were ombudsmen not just in New South Wales, not even just in other Australian states and territories, but actually around the world, almost at the same time, being established. So 50 years ago, 1960s, 1970s, we'd come out of the post-war boom. There were significant changes to the way government was functioning, what it was doing, and particularly the size, scale, and nature of its business. With the establishment of the welfare state, government was now much larger than it had been previously and was touching all aspects of individuals' lives in many different ways, which meant a lot more power was being conferred on the executive arm of government, on bureaucrats, public officials who were given discretion to make decisions and take actions, as opposed to Parliament, which in our system of democracy is sovereign. That's where power emanates from. So with that context, there was seen to be a bit of an accountability gap. The traditional forms of accountability, when you think about Parliament, individuals, members of the public, can of course take concerns, grievances with government action to their local member of Parliament, but Parliament itself, and we'll hear about committees shortly, generally speaking doesn't have the arms and legs to investigate individual complaints and grievances and issues. Courts obviously have a very significant role and still do, but courts are not necessarily easy or cheap for individuals to access, particularly if you're talking about challenging government decisions. It's a bit of a David and Goliath kind of battle. And the other issue with courts is that they are focused entirely on questions of law. So they will ask themselves, was this government action lawful or not? And they will stop at that point. They won't go on to ask themselves, was the government action fair? Was it reasonable? Was it just in all of the circumstances? So in a very short period of time, within a decade, many jurisdictions around the world almost sort of concurrently came upon the same idea at the same time. And what they did was they reached back into Viking history to grab this idea of ombudsman. And you probably don't think of the Vikings as sort of the forerunners of democratic state, but there you go. That said, when you look at the Nordic countries now, where they rate in terms of government integrity, trust in government is very, very high. And I'd like to think that the long role played by ombudsmen in those countries has some impact on that. So the core role of all of these parliamentary ombudsman institutions that were established in the 60s and 70s was essentially to be a mechanism for individuals, any member of the public, to be able to complain, raise a concern that government officials were not acting appropriately. So our Act talks about wrong conduct in the sense of conduct that is unlawful, obviously, but also conduct that is unreasonable, conduct that is unjust, conduct that is oppressive, and my absolute favourite, conduct that is otherwise wrong. And that is still the core of the work of the Ombudsman today, to receive complaints, to investigate, and to seek to resolve those complaints. In 50 years, though, a lot has changed with Ombudsman institutions, and in particular, there's a recognition that complaints themselves are not always the surest guarantee of unearthing government wrongdoing. There are lots of reasons why people with a legitimate complaint, for example, may not complain, even to an independent, approachable, friendly organisation like mine. So there's a lot more focus these days in our work on proactive as well as reactive work, particularly looking at systemic issues to try to identify problems and solutions before complaints arise, rather than just responding where complaints have already arisen. So our functions today extend quite a lot further than complaint handling, to include own motion investigation. So whether anyone complains to us or not, if we see wrongdoing within government, we're able to investigate and report on that. We have a number of proactive monitoring functions where we monitor particular systems like the community services system, Aboriginal programs delivered by government. And we also have review functions. And an example of that is when a child in this state dies as a result of abuse or neglect, we have a function of reviewing particularly what agencies did in the lead up to that child's death, and also afterwards to see if there are any lessons more broadly than that. The second part of your question, my role. So I think the best thing about being the head of an integrity agency is that you kind of have two roles. One role is to perform all of those statutory functions, to lead those statutory functions, so to lead investigation teams, to write reports for Parliament, to do that really kind of detailed and very interesting scrutiny work. The second role is being the CEO of an organisation. So the Ombudsman's office has just over 200 people, and so a large part of my role is managing those people to deliver those functions and to have a job, frankly, that enables you to balance both of those roles, I think is quite a privilege.
Great, thank you very much. And just before I ask my next question, could I just get perhaps Chandel to just close those double doors at the back for me? Thank you. Great, thank you. Robin, would you like to let us know about your position in Parliament and how it works?
Thank you and good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. Look, I'm in opposition for this period of government, and I'm blessed, I think, to have had experience in both worlds, in government and in opposition. But I want to take you back to my earlier days before I came into state politics, and that was as a local government advocate on council for 12 years. And that for me was a really good, I guess, apprenticeship in how to advocate, how to lobby, how to listen to people's problems and try and find solutions. And I was always very conscious in local government that what choices the government makes at local level is spending ratepayers' money. It's not my money, it's the ratepayer. And being very conscious of doing that diligently and appropriately. And appropriateness is a really good word to use in that context, because we've all seen local councils that have perhaps raised money or spent money in areas where others think they could have spent it better. And that's no different in any level of government. So bringing that knowledge and that skill set to state level, being in government and then in opposition, Jason and I have swapped hats, in fact. So advocating and getting things achieved in government is a different language in opposition. And so you learn to reach out and get an understanding of the problem from other people's eyes, what impact a government ruling might have on people that are not happy with that. They'll reach out all of a sudden to the opposition and put their viewpoint forward. So anyone who approaches my office, and I'm the member for Hawkesbury as well, so the Black Summer bushfires and 7 floods later over a 4-year period, my community has been through so much, and that dovetails into my shadow as mental health minister as well, and then into veterans. So there's an intertwinable engagement of responsibility and proactiveness that I find in this role that you can't really separate. And I really don't want to, because I think they complement each other in the needs that we have to deliver and the questions we ask probingly to government when we're in opposition. So I think my style in opposition, I think, is different to some. I like to build relationships and trust with members of the government and work with them to get solutions rather than make massive headlines and think that I'm fighting for things and get no outcome. For me, that's my style. And Jason, you're probably a little bit more like that too, I find. And if you haven't talked to Jason before, he's got this great voice for radio, I've got to say. Really commanding. But look, so everyone, when you come into these roles, has a style of leadership. In opposition, sure, we don't provide all the solutions. The government are putting their solutions on the table, and as an opposition spokesperson, we look at whether we think that's the best way to deal with it. And it may not be agreeable, but then we have to advocate our case. And we have to stand up for people that feel aggrieved by a decision that government has made. And perhaps it's something that the government didn't realise would have an impact. So how do we then best approach it to try and get some wriggle room and some, I guess, some movement towards middle ground? And that's the style as an opposition deputy leader that I have. I take that to my shadow ministry, our leadership group, and also hopefully to, and one example of that, if I can, with Hawkesbury Hospital, which is a local issue, but I had union members coming to me saying, please help us, we're going to lose all our entitlements when the New South Wales government steps in and takes over the contract, which we thought was great that they were doing that, but the members of the health workers were going to lose all their entitlements and have it paid out, and tax implications and things like that. So what did I do? I got out there with the placards, out on the road with the union folks, and I stood there toe-to-toe with them to try and push that. And in the background, I worked with Ryan Park and other members of government, and we actually got a really good outcome just recently, so that they can have their entitlements carried over, as we felt it should. So it's the style of leadership that you might bring when you're in opposition that mightn't be loud and noisy, but it's the outcomes at the end. You don't have to take all the accolades. There are a lot of people that came in the back end of that to help get the outcome, and then everyone's happy. So it doesn't always work, but just to let you know, for me, conversation is very important going forward to get an outcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Jason, would you like to tell us about your role?
Thanks so much, Daniela. Can everybody hear me? Okay, it's great.
I told you had a nice voice, didn't I?
Thank you.
I made you embarrassed.
I'm Jason Lee. Apart from being the member for Strathfield, I chair the ICAC committee and the Public Accounts Committee. They're both key, I guess, integrity. They're both integrity committees that are part of the New South Wales Parliament, but their functions are quite different. So the ICAC committee, we sort of monitor and we oversight the operations and the effectiveness of the ICAC and the ICAC inspector. And we make recommendations to Parliament about things that we think could be done better or things that aren't being done terribly well. Really importantly, we're not an appeal body. And a lot of people in the public don't understand it. So if people from the public are unhappy about a decision of the ICAC, for instance, they think that somebody should have been investigated, but the ICAC said, no, we don't want to investigate them. Very often they'll write to our committee to say, can you review that decision? That's not the committee's role to review decisions of the ICAC. It's to look at the overall functioning of the ICAC, whether it's working well and whether we can make recommendations to the Parliament about how it can be improved. An example of that is, you probably know, Operation Keppel. That was the one involving the former Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, and Darryl Maguire. There was a view that that inquiry took, and the reporting took, a very, very long time, a long, long time. And related to that were concerns about the impact on witnesses, on those that have been accused of wrongdoing. Your life really goes into limbo until that decision gets handed down. And so it wasn't our committee, we're quite new at this, but the previous ICAC committee recommended that there should be a time limit. There should be reasonable periods of time in which ICAC makes these reports. And that was a recommendation in an ICAC committee's report, and that was adopted and legislated. So that's an example of what the ICAC committee does. The Public Accounts Committee is quite different. We work really closely with the Audit Office. And that is the Public Accounts Committee is really about the effectiveness of the use of public resources. So taxpayers' money, public resources, are they being used honestly? Both of these institutions, I think, go to the core question of trust in government. Because if you have a democracy where people don't trust their core governmental institutions, it doesn't work. It's a bit of a disaster. And so really these institutions are trying to build public trust in government and governmental institutions. And so the Public Accounts Committee is really about, are taxpayers' money being used properly, honestly, effectively, efficiently? And operationally, we will take, generally, we're just a committee, we have our parliamentary duties. We don't have the resources that the Audit Office does, so we don't deep dive and we don't do that detailed audit work. We rely very much on the audit reports from the Auditor General's Office. We will take those reports. We will often do additional inquiries. We'll hold a public inquiry, and then we will take the results of that inquiry and we will report to the Parliament on those results. So really what that is about is sunlight. It's about transparency. Not everybody may read an Auditor General's report. The Auditor General may be a fantastic media sort of performer, and there will be media reporting on interesting issues that come out from Auditors General's reports and Audit Office reports. What the Public Accounts Committee does is when we hold hearings, generally they are public hearings, and the media can report on those. And when we issue a report to the Parliament, that will be a public report, and it will be much more focused on particular issues. So this again just unearths these important issues. It provides transparency to those issues, and then interested members of the public or interested members of the media can grab hold of those things and shine a light on them. And that's how the transparency and the accountability process works in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I love organising these events because I learn so much each time. So my next question, I think I'll do it again. I think I'll double barrel it again because I have two questions, and listening to what you've said, I think they're similar questions. So the first one is, how do we strike a balance between the powers of government and the powers of oversight bodies in order to maintain a healthy democracy? And then I was going to ask you about your organisations, particularly the Ombudsman and the Auditor General, and whether you're funded via a budget bid to Treasury each year, and if that's the case, does that reliance on government funding restrict you in any way? So I guess it's about that balance of, we need government to be strong and do what they need to do and what they were elected to do, but we also need oversight bodies to be really strong. So can you comment on that for me?
Okay, so I'll start. So thanks for that question. It's actually a very fundamental question in terms of I'll start with the funding part first. And I will give credit, to New South Wales compared to the Commonwealth, where I was in the last 6 years. So for integrity agencies, there's never been, I'm not aware of any funding issues. So we invoice fees to agencies. For our performance audits, we are appropriated by Parliament, and for special requests by ministers and the treasurer, we also get funded by that. So, in fact, one of the things that I'm actually looking at, part of what, when we talk about use of taxpayers' money, and because in my 8 years, if I want to learn something, I want a methodology that would determine what we call efficiency in the use of taxpayers' money. So what I'm doing for the first year is to look inwards and make sure that as Audit Office, we are efficiently carrying out our duties. There will be a lot of news that I've heard regarding local government, and I'm actually looking at that. I'm engaging with the CEOs. I've met a few of them already today, Department of Planning. So the funding aspect, I think, is from the South Wales Auditor General's Office. I think it's good, and I think we will make sure that we use that efficiently. Now, the power balance is actually a very important point to clarify. The Auditor General's role, and I was serious when I used the word watchdog and not blowhand. The auditor's role is not to catch you doing wrong. The auditor's role, in fact, that was articulated by Lord Denning in 1983, that talks about when human beings do things, you're bound to make mistakes. The mistake the auditor seeks to find, and the mistake the auditor seeks to correct. And that is the role. If we look for systemic problems in the environment, we seek to correct that. Now, as you remember, I think it was the question I was asked before I got this role, when you talk about the power of the Auditor General, and because it's assumed to be unlimited. Well, my answer to that, honestly, is if you have power and you use it, it means you've lost it. And that is where I think I'm using to make sure that that balance is always there in the outcomes of the report I do.
Great, thank you. Mr. Miller.
Thanks. I might pick up the second question first, because I agree with Bowler's point about, I'm not sure that balance between the power of government and on the one hand and oversight bodies on the other hand is the right way to characterise it, because certainly from my perspective, I like to think that actually the mission of oversight bodies is aligned with the objectives of government. If you're looking at corrupt conduct, maladministration, misconduct, the kind of things that we're looking at, that ICAC is looking at, those are things that fundamentally undermine trust in government, the effectiveness of government. So in theory, at least, we're aligned with government. And you see that most clearly in the functions of offices like ours in places like education, prevention, and the work we do with agencies to identify systemic improvements. That said, it has to be acknowledged that being scrutinised by an oversight body is not always a comfortable thing for government agencies and officials, some oversight bodies more than others. And so I think it is fair to ask the question, who watches the watchdogs, that kind of cliched question. To that, two observations. The first is, it is the case that oversight bodies are themselves subject to oversight. As Jason has mentioned, we are all responsible to and report to parliamentary committees before whom we are grilled regularly in terms of our performance. My office is oversighted by ICAC, so if there is wrongdoing within my office, a complaint can be made to ICAC. Even bodies that are within my jurisdiction, so Safe Work New South Wales, for example, as the regulator of work health and safety, still has jurisdiction over me in respect of my work health and safety responsibilities. And for those oversight bodies that have both particularly strong and often covert powers of investigation, so bodies like ICAC and the LEC, they are also oversighted by an inspector. He's usually a very senior lawyer or a former judge. The second point, though, and it kind of goes to Bowler's point about power, the New South Wales Ombudsman cannot force a government agency to do anything. We can tell government agencies and officials when we think they have done the wrong thing. We can tell them what we think it would take to fix that problem, what it would take to do the right thing. We can't force them to do that, though. The most that we can do is to force their minister to stand up in Parliament and explain why they have a different view from us. What that means, and I think it's really critical because I often get the question about, does that mean that you're toothless as an oversight body? But I think it is actually an inherent and perhaps one of the most powerful aspects of an ombudsman's office is that inability to make what we would call determinative decisions. And the reason for that is that the force of our work, the force of our findings and recommendations is not based on a piece of legislation telling someone they have to implement it. It's based on how persuasive we can be in convincing the agency, the Parliament, the public, that our findings are rigorously evidence-based, that our recommendations are practicable and appropriate. And so, in a sense, that's the accountability that we hold ourselves to. It's every time we do an investigation, make a report, we have to convince people that what we're doing is appropriate, because at the end of the day, we can't force people to do anything except give us documents, evidence, all of those sort of things in the investigation itself.
Thank you. Robin?
Just looking at it from a political perspective, I come back to the comments I said earlier in that in these roles, these are privileged roles. We've been elected into these roles to represent communities. In the upper house, it's to represent provinces and beyond. And typically the upper house in the Legislative Council is the area that holds inquiries, mostly. So they are the House of Review. In the Legislative Assembly, we're working with the community and local members. And we are still responsible on the way we divide and disseminate taxpayers' funds to run the state, whether it's education, it's hospitals, it's infrastructure that we build. Everything that a taxpayer contributes deserves a dividend in the way a responsible government manages that budget, that whole pot of money. So it's about governments acting appropriately, local members acting appropriately as well, and having accountability. In these roles, you are judged every single day, as it should be. And there are organisations that have been established outside of Parliament that will hold people to account if others have reported something they feel is not right or just. That said, though, it's evidence-based, and it shouldn't just be a witch hunt because it's a dislike of an individual. And I want to point that out particularly. And I noticed in one of the first actions that this government did put forward was to make sure that any reporting by a Member of Parliament should not be for personal gain. It should actually be for an issue that is incorrect and inappropriate. And it's good to have audit of Members of Parliaments as well to make sure that they're doing the right process. Now, sometimes newer members or older members have bad habits that weren't even shown, and they should be corrected. If it's intentional, that should come out as well, and that should be exposed. And you as the audience and the people in this state have a right to know and have that right to transparency. So I think that's where organisations have a really big role to play, to hold the government to account, to hold the members to account, to make sure that they are in these privileged roles and they act accordingly, as you would expect us to.
Great, thank you. Jason, did you want to comment?
I think just quickly on your question around powers, I think I'll approach this two ways. The first is the committees, we are bodies of the Parliament. we're sort of organs of the Parliament. So if you take it back to a separation of powers thing, the power really rests in the executive government, the ministers, the Premier, the ministers making those executive decisions. Parliament's role is at least partly to hold the executive to account around those through the function of the opposition, the function of question time, etc., and the role of committees as well. We can hold inquiries, we can ask questions, we have powers to demand information. And then through our reporting, either to Parliament or publicly, we shine a light on the decisions and the effectiveness of decisions that the government has made. However, and I'll let you in on a I guess a secret, or the way that this works. So if I were to ask you, if it being the Public Accounts Committee, right, and we're to hold the government to account for the use, the effectiveness and the use of taxpayer money, I'm a member of the government, right? I chair the committee. So the question is, do you think it's better that the chair and the control of the Public Accounts Committee rests with the government, or should it rest with the opposition? Right. So, and that's the reality of it. So you might go, all right, it's much better that it rests with the opposition, because then you're going to really go hard, at the government, and that's a valid argument. The opposing argument is to say, well, look, this isn't all just about putting things in the media and shaming the government and making them look bad. Because as a member of the government, if I see something that makes me uncomfortable, I have that sort of relationship where I can go to the minister and say, hey, this is not great here. And we can, through the government and through our party's processes, we can get things done to fix things in a more collaborative or cooperative way that doesn't involve blowing it up in the public and embarrassing the government. And because I'm a member of the government, I have that access and I have that influence, and it's another way of getting things done. So it's debatable, and it's an ongoing debate about Public Accounts Committee, whether an independent MP or a member of the opposition should chair it, and who should have the numbers on that committee. But I think the overriding point is that all of our institutions are creatures of politics, and the political process and the way politics plays out in this is always relevant. But ultimately, the goal of these is to create more transparency and accountability and trust, ultimately, in that political process.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers to these complex questions in an incredibly intelligent way. I'm really looking at the clock, but I'd love to get at least one question from the audience. So my colleague Joseph, who's been monitoring our Slido platform. Joseph, what have we got?
Yeah, we've received quite a few questions. A few of them are about comparisons with other jurisdictions. So do you have a federal or international counterpart that you work with? And how do you think New South Wales compares and is performing as a jurisdiction in keeping the government to account?
Great. So we might just whip around. Paula, would you like to start?
Okay, I'll be quick. So we are a member of what we call PASIL, as a Pacific Auditor General's group, and we have yearly meetings and we share ideas. We actually support developmental issues in terms of auditing methodology with Solomon Islands. So we do a lot of that. In comparing the powers, it's similar across jurisdiction, but I was just reading specifics of the New South Wales Auditor General's Act, which is called in the Government Sector Audit Act, is actually the most powerful because of that requirement and mandate to specifically look at wastage of public resources. And that is why I think for New South Wales, it's probably the most powerful act, in the Commonwealth.
Great, thank you.
Likewise, as I mentioned, there are ombudsmen all around the world. There's an International Ombudsman Institute, which has observer status with the UN, we're a member of. We participate in forums with our Australian, New Zealand and Pacific colleagues. In terms of comparatively, the significant difference between ombudsman offices around Australia in particular is two things. One is resourcing and the second is functions. So in terms of resourcing, you'll not be surprised to hear that New South Wales, the Commonwealth, are relatively well-funded ombudsman offices. Victoria and Queensland, not too bad. WA, not too bad. Tasmania and South Australia in particular, I would say, are very, very underfunded, even for accounting for population differences. In terms of functions, the core function of an ombudsman office is pretty consistent, but the agencies and issues that they oversight will obviously be quite different. If you're operating at the Commonwealth level, you're talking about things like immigration, detention, etc. And also in New South Wales, we have quite a few functions that a lot of other ombudsman offices don't have. So things like child death reviews that I mentioned earlier, our oversight of the whistleblower regime, that sort of thing.
Great, thank you.
We're a little bit different being a government, of course, but we have federal government, which is an overarching government for us. And often I noticed in my local area, wearing my local member for Hawkesbury hat, with the disasters and the recovery funding, we've worked very closely together with federal and state members that are impacted. We had Lismore as well with the floods there, bushfires down in Bega, down that way in the South Highlands around there. So you interact with government agencies, you look at other states and their behaviour and how they've dealt with issues, and often it's about the political alignments that you might have as well with different countries and what's going on there. Look at Jack's Law, for example, in Queensland, and the fact that the government is now looking at adopting that as well. So, you know, we do share conversations and look at best practice as well from outside of the realm of New South Wales.
Thank you. And Jason?
I don't have a lot to add here. I think everybody's across the federal, the federal anti-corruption sort of commission that's recently been set up. I think New South Wales has a very, very robust and powerful ICAC. In respect of Public Accounts Committee, there is a thing that I got back from a couple of weeks ago, which is the Australasian Conference or something of Public Accounts Committees, the ACPAC. We all get together, we compare notes. It's a riveting experience. And so there is that sort of comparative sort of work.
Great, thank you. Now, I'm afraid that is all the time we have for questions tonight, but please join me in a round of applause for our panel members. Thank you so much for taking the time out tonight of your very busy roles to be with us. Thank you to the audience for being here and for your questions as well. We literally could not do it without you.